بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المأسومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd, respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My congratulations to you all on today, the day of Friday. Alhamdulillah, day of tawfiq for us to begin together this next chapter and this next process of working together and celebrating the day of Friday as a community. One of the recommendations of our sixth Imam has been that dedicate some time during your week for the study of your faith and your religion. Implementing this practice, my habit is that the khutbahs on Fridays will be around the tafsir of the Holy Quran, that we spend some time pondering over, learning from the Quran and delving into the sciences of the Quran to improve our relationship with the Holy Book and to invest in the learning. As such, as part of the series that has been begun in the past, the discussion that we'll begin with is around the 77th chapter of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Mursalat, or the emissaries as it is also known. The 77th chapter of the Holy Quran consists of 50 verses, and it is one of the earlier surahs that was revealed to us in the city of Mecca. The difference between the surahs revealed in Mecca and Medina, that in Mecca more of the surahs are pertaining to the introduction to Islam as well as the aqaid and philosophy of faith and important concepts to the fundamental of what belief means. And the surahs revealed in Medina pertain more to the ahkam and Islamic laws that are associated with how to implement the philosophy of faith into our life. As such, this surah talks more about what is the expectation of the hereafter, and one of the refrains in this verse that comes, one of the refrains in this surah that comes is the verse, وَيْلٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ, and woe that day the rejectors of truth. This verse that is repeated about 10 times in Surah Al-Mursalat is a reminder for those, as the day of judgment, the hereafter, and the consequences in this chapter are discussed, that soon you will have to deal with the consequences of the actions of what you have done and what you have belied. Further to that, it separates out various topics of discussion. The idea of an ayah being in refrain is one of the poetic structures of the use of the Quran, and there are two famous examples. One is this in Surah Mursalat, وَيْلٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ. And the more famous one that we know very well in Surah Al-Rahman, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. The difference between these two refrains, that in Surah Rahman, where Allah goes and says, and which of these bounties will you belie, is that there is a discussion of the blessings and the mercy and the good things that Allah has given us, and He's constantly reminding us. Whereas in Surah Al-Mursalat, Allah is describing the punishment and frightening people from the punishment that comes, and therefore He keeps repeating the phrase, وَيْلٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ. This surah is recommended for us to study and to learn about this surah because of two ahadith that we'll mention. One from our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that one who studies Surah Mursalat, the 77th chapter of the Quran, will be registered as a non-pagan, meaning he will be away from the mushrikeen. And then one from our sixth Imam, where the Imam cites and says, one who studies this surah and learns this surah, Allah makes him from amongst the companions and friends and familiar relations with our Holy Prophet. So therefore there are advantages for us to learn about this surah and to invest in it. And briefly we'll mention the first 5 verses of the surah in today's discussion. Allah begins the surah with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالْمُرْسِلَاتِ عُرْفًا, and by the emissaries sent successively, as Allah begins this. This discussion of وَالْمُرْسِلَاتِ عُرْفًا is a discussion to say that whether Allah intends for this to be referring to the angels that Allah sends, or to the wind, for example, and that the wind that is sent successively to each location. Urfan, where it's used in this verse, refers to the idea of something that is sent continuously, that it is continuously flowing and continuously moving. The discussion why it pertains to wind in this is to reference and say that how the wind is continuously moving on this earth and bringing about benefit and bringing about all of the necessary changes on this earth that are required for people to be able to live in this world and to benefit from it. Allah continues and He says, فَالْعَاصِفَاتِ عُصْفًا, and by those who sweep along like a gale or a hurricane. That Allah from the beginning, the first verse describes a normal wind that continuously flows. And then secondly, in the second verse, He's describing those which are harsh winds that flow and those which are like a hurricane. وَالنَّاشِرَاتِ نَشْرًا. And in the third verse, Allah continues, and those who publish far and wide, who bring about far and wide. This discussion of referring to wind that brings rain, that disperses the clouds and fertilizes the land with precipitation, is one of the interpretations of this verse. When we take a look and we see these first three verses, there are two sets of interpretations, actually all five. So we'll continue. Allah makes five promises in the beginning of this surah. One, وَالْمُرْسِلَاتِ عُرْفًا. ثاني, فَالْعَاصِفَاتِ عَصْفًا. ثالثة, وَالنَّاشِرَاتِ نَشْرًا. The fourth verse, فَالْفَارِقَاتِ فَرْقًا. And by those who separate and go in distinct different directions. Again, some say that this refers to the wind and how the wind separates into different directions, and others say that it refers to the angels. فَالْمُلْقِيَاتِ ذِكْرًا. And those who inspire God's remembrance. These five verses all make oaths that Allah makes promises by. And there are three sets of interpretations of what is meant by these oaths that Allah makes. The first interpretation says that all five of these are referring to the winds and the attribute of the wind. And that Allah is saying that by the wind which was sent forth one after another, by the violent hurricane winds which move, by those which scatter the clouds and bring down to the earth the lively droplets of rain through the clouds, and those that scatter clouds after falling rain, and the very wind which reminds people of Allah. One interpretation of these five verses is all of these descriptions are pertaining to the wind, and Allah is swearing by the wind successively, and the different attributes of the wind and the benefits that we receive from the wind. The second interpretation is to say that no, Allah is discussing in this the angels and the malaika, and that Allah is swearing by angels in all five of these verses, and saying by the angels who are sent forth one after another to the prophets. Then that those who move as a hurricane to carry out their mission, that the angels are the ones that move like hurricanes and by strong winds to carry out their missions. Those who deliver the heavenly verses and scatter them amongst the people on this earth. Those by who this action separate and purify from evil because of the actions of the angels. And finally, and those who give Allah's message and instruct to the prophets so as to remind people. These are two separate interpretations, the same verses. But the Mufassirin came to different conclusions. And finally, those who came and said, no, it's actually a little bit of this and a little bit of that. That the first two verses are pertaining to the swearing of Allah by the wind, and that the next three verses are referring to the malaika. Now, one of the interesting points when we get into the tafsir of Quran and mentioning these differences and mentioning different opinions is that it's not our responsibility to say, yes, this one is right, and no, that one is right. Our responsibility is to ponder over the Quran and to think about the Quran and look at the beauty of Allah's message. So at many times we will find differences in opinions, and we don't have to come to the conclusion to say that, yes, this one is the one that's only right, or that one is the one that's only right. The beauty of the Quran, that Allah has used such language in the Quran, has chosen such words, that each word in the Quran can have up to 70 different unique meanings. And the beauty of it can be that each and every single one of those meanings can be accurately attributed to the verse simultaneously. That Allah could be implying all of these meanings, that it could very well be that all three of these are correct. That from the one aspect, Allah, for one level of capacity of people, is discussing the wind, that they can understand and appreciate Allah's creation in the wind. In another aspect, it could be that those who ponder on a different level, that they're considering and seeing the truth of the malaika in these statements. And there's no reason to say that if one is true, that the other can't be true. And that finally, we can even go so far as to say that Allah is addressing both. That He begins His description by the wind, and then He shifts His description to the malaika. Both are valid. All three are valid, and there's no problem with it, which is why many times we'll come to points in the interpretation and understanding of the Holy Quran that different perspectives are presented. Our goal in these conversations is to open our hearts and our minds to the Quran, to learn the lessons of the language of Allah, and that the day of Friday should not pass except that we have added to ourselves something from the Holy Quran. With tawfiq, inshallah, this surah consists of 50 verses. Every week we'll discuss some of the verses in this surah, and we'll elaborate on some of the points that the various mufassirin have brought so that we have a familiarity with the Quran and that we can take the barakat of this surah. When we say that there are benefits to reciting the surah, for example, being familiar with the Holy Prophet, about being in his company, about receiving the benefits of not being from amongst the pagans, it's not simply the recitation of the surah, but the pondering over the surah and the thoughtfulness over the surah. And our goal will be that, inshallah, as we go through, we discuss each of the chapters of the Quran and increase our familiarity with the Quran. We ask Allah by the right of this day, by the right of the Hadirin Qayem, that, oh Allah, make us attached to the Holy Quran. Ya Allah, by the right of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt, keep us with those who are the righteous and keep us with those who are the pious in this world and the hereafter. Oh Allah, keep us and our families on the upright religion of Islam. Give us the tawfiq to stay attached to the Holy Quran and benefit from it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين والحسن والحسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة وعلي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي الجواد وعلي بن محمد الهادي والحسن بن علي الأسكري وحجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه وظهوره وجعلنا من أعوانه والأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد. أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. I enjoin upon you and myself to have fear and piety of Allah. Briefly, as our second discussion, it's appropriate that in our khutbahs there should be a discussion of some contemporary point and issue. And one of the important contemporary points for us to be paying attention to is the start of the blessed month of Sha'ban. That this isn't a month that we treat as a normal day or a normal time, but rather that it contains some significance and importance that have been pointed out to us that we take advantage of this month. As such, there's a hadith from Kitab al-Iqbal in volume 3, page 295 that narrates from our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam. A person by the name of Dawood ibn Kathir al-Raqi comes to our Imam and asks a question. And the narration goes, Sa'altu Aba Abdullah Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam an as-Sawm al-Rajab. That the man Dawood comes to our sixth Imam and asks him about fasting in the month of Rajab. And Imam Sadiq replies to him, Aina antum an Sawm al-Sha'ban. In reply to Dawood asking about fasting in the month of Rajab and its benefits, Imam Sadiq says, what is your knowledge and what do you understand? Where are you about in terms of fasting in the month of Sha'ban? Dawood replies and he says, فَقُلْتُ يَا ابْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ مَا ثَوَابْ مَنْ سَامَ يَوْمًا مِنْ شَعْبَانَ. What's the reward? I don't even know the reward. If someone was to fast in the month of Sha'ban, what would be the reward for that person? Imam Sadiq replies, فَقَالَ الْجَنَّةُ وَاللَّهِ الْجَنَّةُ. That heaven is the answer and the reward for someone who fasts in the month of Sha'ban. So Dawood replies and he says, يَا ابْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ وَمَا أَفْضَلُ مَنْ يُفْعَلُ فِيهِ. What's the best thing someone can do in this month of Sha'ban? If fasting holds such a great reward in Sha'ban, what are the things that we should be doing in this month? Dawood's question, and the interesting thing about what Dawood is asking is showing to us that Dawood was completely unaware that Sha'ban is something special. He thought that the speciality lasted in the month of Rajab, and when Rajab ended, so did all of the good things with it ended. Imam Sadiq's answer to him of telling him that you thought this fasting of Rajab was important, the fasting of Sha'ban one day makes Jannah, heaven, wajib upon you. And Allah will give you heaven for this fasting. So Dawood's question now is, then what should I be doing in this month? Meaning that I didn't even pay attention that Sha'ban had some value. And now I need to understand what is the value of this month. So here the Imam goes through and gives him an explanation of what are some of the mutabarrak actions of this month. And the Imam replies, فَقَالَ الصَّدَقَةُ وَالْإِسْتِغْفَارُ. Imam replies and he says, in this month, give charity and seek forgiveness of Allah. وَمَنْ تَصَدَّقَ بِصَدَقَةٍ فِي شَعْبَانٍ رَبَّهَ اللَّهُ كَمَا يُرَبِّي أَحَدَكُمْ فَصِيلَهُ. Imam explains and he says, in this month, give charity and seek istighfar. One who gives charity in this month of Sha'ban, Allah increases, Allah invests in, Rabbahu is how you grow something, grows that sadaqah of his. The same way one of you, if you had a baby camel, how would you grow it? You would give it food and nourish it and grow it so it gets big. He says, Allah will take that charity and grow it the way you would grow a baby camel. حتى يوافي يوم القيامة وقد صار مثل جبل الأحد. And Allah will help this charity grow, that if you give in this month of Sha'ban, give some charity. And Allah will help it grow so that when it meets you on the day of judgment, that little bit of charity will be the equivalent of the mountain of Uhud for you on that day. Now today, the mountain of Uhud, they've kind of destroyed it to where it's a little hill. But the reality of that mountain was something special. It was something major. Even any mountain. The term mountain, if it's appropriate, that I gave something and Allah gave me a mountain of wealth back. How amazing would that be? The statement of the Imam is teaching us some of the important things in this month that we should not neglect. One is the aspect of fasting even one day in this holy month. That at least one day we should fast with understanding Allah's promise, that He's promising us heaven for someone who fasts in this month. Now, a question that may come is that, for example, if I have qada fasts and it's a mustahab fast that's being discussed, a person cannot do a mustahab fast as long as they have a wajib qada fast due from them. But Allah's mercy is such that He says, even if you do the wajib, I'll give you the reward of the mustahab on top of it. So if we have qada fasts, this is a great month to make them up in. And making them up in this month will give us the benefits of the mustahab as well as the wajib that's important for us to pay attention to. Along with that, the aspect of giving charity in this month. That this is a month of charity, and that the reward for that charity will be increased multiple fold for us on the day of judgment, and seeking Allah's forgiveness. That in this month of mercy, we shouldn't let the month pass without that Allah asking Him for this forgiveness. This month is famously known as the month of our Holy Prophet. Our Prophet would describe and say, Rajab is the month of Allah, Sha'ban is my month, and Ramadan is the month of the Muslimin. Our goal to take advantage of this month of Ramadan in its entirety begins with the spiritual development process that begins in the month of Rajab. That we start changing our behavior in Rajab, and in this month in particular, we continue the process of changing our behaviors and doing more and more good so that by the time Shahr Ramadan comes, we're prepared for it. And which is why fasting in this month and preparing fasting in this month prepares us for the month of Ramadan, where when fasting becomes wajib, we aren't tired by it and we take advantage of this month. There's one other thing that I'll mention. In this month of Sha'ban, one of the recommended actions is the repetition of a short dua, a short phrase, that repeating it 1,000 times in this month is one of the great a'mal of this month. It's recommended by the Ahlul Bayt that one should repeat in this month, La ilaha illallah, wa la na'budu illa iya, mukhlisina lahuddin, wa law kariha al-mushrikun. 1,000 times in this month. This short phrase, which is associated with also dua wahda that we recite as well too, and there is this phrase as well, translates to La ilaha illallah, there is no God save Allah, wa la na'budu illa iya, we do not worship anyone except Him, mukhlisina lahuddin, for Him is the pure religion, وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ, however much the disbelievers dislike this. This short dua is from the mustahabbat of this month and carries with it great rewards for us to do, and it's a way of honoring this month in particular, and this dhikr is unique to this month. So to take that time and to repeat this short dhikr 1,000 times in this month, it can be done in one sitting, it can be done across 10 days, it can be done across every other day, or just to take a weekend and tasbih, it's 10 tasbihs. La ilaha illallah, wa la na'budu illa iya, mukhlisina lahuddin, wa law kariha al-mushrikun. And we take advantage of this month. The beauty of months like this and the spiritual heightening in this month is that anyone has the ability to exert themselves just a little bit more than normal. And the barakat of this month open up to us. So one of the most important things that we can do is take advantage of this month before it leaves us. We have another 3 weeks. Next week, inshallah, we'll continue our discussion on this topic as well too, being that next week will coincide with the 15th of Sha'ban. Laylatul Bara'a is associated with that, the birth of the Imam of our time, Al-Qayem Ali Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And next week what we'll do is, if those who are available to come, we'll begin 30 minutes before the time of Juma and start the process of reciting Dua Nudba. Dua Nudba is from amongst the mustahabbat to be recited on every Friday. one of the beauties of Dua Nudba and its association that next week will start, which is the birth date of our Imam, is that this dua is actually composite of 3 parts. The first part is acknowledging and speaking to the history of Anbiya and the guidance that Allah put on this earth, and acknowledging and bearing witness that I believe in the guidance given through all of the Anbiya to our Prophet, and then the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt that came. The second part of this dua is, once I've submitted to that this is my ideology and faith, is the process of recognizing and communicating with the Imam of our time. In Dua Nudba, one of the amazing things is you actually speak to the Imam of your time, and you have a conversation with him, and you speak to him in this dua. And then finally, after you've spoken to the Imam of the time, you turn back to Allah, and then you make your dua, and you ask Allah to hasten his reappearance and connect us with him and give us the benefit. And that every Friday it's recommended to recite this dua, and we'll make it a practice that inshallah every Friday, 30 minutes before we start the adhan for Salat al-Juma, we'll take the time to recite this dua, and in it every week we'll have the opportunity to speak to our Imam directly. And inshallah may Allah give us tawfiq to be amongst the supporters of the Imam. Again, we ask Allah by the right of this day, by the right of the Hadirin Qayem, that, oh Allah, first and foremost, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of the day of Friday, by the right of the mention of Ahlul Bayt in the Quran. Fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, those amongst our families, our communities of mu'mineen who are suffering through sickness and disease, give shifa and aman to the mu'mineen wherever they may be. Ya Allah, there are those who are suffering through strife and insecurity around the world. Give aman to the mu'mineen and muslimeen wherever they are. Oh Allah, keep our children and our families on the upright path of Islam. Ya Allah, hasten the appearance of Sahib al-Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahib al-Zaman, and entitle us to the ziyarat of Imam Hussain in this world, and the shafa'a of Imam Hussain in the hereafter. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna Allah ya'muru bil-adli wal-ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal-munkar wal-baghi ya'idukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Sadaqallahu al-aliyyul azim.